that day. The moon was hiding behind the clouds, and everyone was anxiously waiting for it to appear. And then, finally, everyone was absolutely thrilled to see it through the telescopes. The moon is often taken for granted, but suddenly it felt like something worth seeking out. It even felt strangely touching. Meanwhile, the smartphone group outside was just as busy. Everyone was trying out the techniques they learned earlier, capturing memories along with the moon.
잘 되고 계시나요? 제일 빛나는 별이 여기 있어서.
Learning astrophotography on a date. What an unforgettable night. Feels like plenty more night sky shots will be taken after this.
평상시에 여행 가거나 그러면 밤에 눈으로 참 예쁘게 별이 잘 보이는데 카메라로는 좀 담기가 어려웠을 때가 많거든요. 그래서
맞습니다. 오늘
배운 거를 잘 기억했다가 찍으면 그래도 또 잘 나오는 사진을 볼 수 있지 않을까 싶네요.
The Starlight Festival offered a chance to learn and experience science up close. Tonight, lift your eyes to the night sky and discover a star that's yours and yours alone.
어렸을 때 아버지가 클래식을 좋아하셔서 자연스럽게 공연장을 이제 가족들이 다 같이 가게 되었는데, 그때 포피아노 연주를 제가 실제로 가서 봤었는데 그때 이제 너무 멋있다 생각이 들어서 부모님께 피아노를 하고 싶다고 졸랐습니다. 저조차도 누군가의 연주를 보고 이렇게 피아니스트를 꿈꿔왔듯이 누군가도 제 연주를 듣고 다양한 감정을 이렇게 느꼈으면 좋겠어요. 어쨌든 저는 21세기 사람이니까 21세기 트렌드를 또 잃으면 안 될 것 같아서 간혹은 또 가요나 팝송도 많이 들으려고 노력하고 있고요. 그러다가도 또 이제 다시 클래식으로 돌아오게 되더라고요. 그냥 클래식 음악은 진짜 어떤 시대에 들어도 누구나 공감할 수 있다고 생각을 해서 그래서 클래식 음악이 제일 마음에 와닿는 것 같아요. 지나바카오 콩쿠르에서 특히 2라운드 연주가 저는 항상 기억에 남는 게 너무 무서웠어요, 사실. 한 음만 치는데 다음 음이 뭐였는지 기억이 안 날까 봐 너무 두렵더라고요. 악몽을 너무 많이 꿨었고 연습을 하는데도 불구하고 끝까지 안 되는 음악적인 패시지라든지 테크닉적인 패시지들이 있는데 그게 무대 위에서 정말 무의식적인 세계에서 갑자기 해결이 되는 경우가 있더라고요. 그랬을 때 이제 희열을 확 느끼는 것 같아요. 제가 지금 공부하고 있는 곡들, 즐겨 연주하고 있는 곡들이 사실 클래식 음악을 처음 접하는 분들에겐 익숙하지 않은 곡들이지만 지금 제 나이에 가장 잘 표현할 수 있는 음악이라고 생각을 해서 그런 레퍼토리를 준비를 하고 있는 거니까 같이 즐겨주시고 같이 공유해 주시면 감사하겠습니다.
Curious about what's special about K-content?
In recent years, Korean cultural content has taken the world by storm.
So, what's your favorite K-content? Movies, dramas, music, exhibitions?
Are you ready to take your pick?
Starting with globally acclaimed K-movies. It's no longer rare for Korean movies to receive awards at international film festivals. And we can't talk enough about the K-drama sensation.
It's not surprising that drama filming sites go on to become major tourist attractions.
When we are on the topic of K-pop, we can't leave out idol groups. They are the driving force of K-pop.
K-pop idol group members do not only have exceptional singing and dancing skills, but they have the looks too. I'm a huge fan.
I really like Korean underground music. These days, talented K-indie bands are recognized overseas as well.
Oh, and Korea also has a lot of music festivals. You can meet musicians of all genres at these events.
Exhibitions happen in Korea all year round.
I also enjoy going to the theatre. There's no shortage of musicals, plays, and performances to choose from. So keep an eye on the theatre scene.
Then there is K-design, blending traditional and modern elements.
K-fashion, leading trends.
K-beauty, which takes beauty to the next level.
K-content, receiving praise the world over. Watch it, experience it, and enjoy it.
held its first debate over the weekend.
The economy is expected to expand 2.5% this year. in Korea's ties with its global partners on the sidelines of the Status UN summit. A massive drone attack on Ukraine overnight on Monday and Tuesday.
Arirang.
In our headlines on this Monday, December 8th, here in South Korea. Speaking at a fiscal execution review meeting earlier today, Finance Minister Koo Yoon-chul calls on government ministries to finalize their respective plans for 2026 by the end of this month to allow for the swift execution of related budgets starting on New Year's Day. Meanwhile, most of South Korea's 126 judges nationwide partake in a national conference either in person or online on this Monday to share their thoughts on the ruling party's commitment to judicial reform. And new government findings show 1 out of 20 residents here in South Korea has a migrant background, accounting for over 5% of the country's total population. Finance Minister Koo Yoon-chul has called on government ministries to be prepared to promptly put into action their budget plans for next year. The call comes in light of the Parliament's approval of the government-proposed spending bill of 728 trillion won last Tuesday. Our Jung-kwan covers his remarks.
Presiding over a fiscal execution meeting at the government complex Seoul on Monday, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Economy and Finance Koo Yoon-chul urged all ministries to finalize their business plans for the upcoming year by the end of December to ensure swift execution of the budgets starting New Year's Day. Highlighting that the budget for 2026 was passed on December 2nd and that it marks the first time in 5 years for it to do so within the legal deadline, Koo emphasized that thorough preparation is crucial to support the stabilization of people's livelihoods in an innovation-driven economy. Last week, the Assembly endorsed the government budget bill of 727.9 trillion won, roughly $493.5 billion for next year, which calls for more spending to prop up the economy and on national defense. Regarding this year's finances, he stressed the need to minimize unused funds to maintain the momentum of the economic recovery and called on ministries for thorough monitoring.
Furthermore, the conclusion of this year's budget is very important in order to maintain the economic recovery momentum of the new administration. While the overall execution status of this year's budget is favorable, I ask that you meticulously monitor it and not let up until the very end.
He also added that both the central and local governments will make special efforts, working together, to ensure that the warmth brought from economic recovery reaches all citizens equally. The main budget is scheduled to be presented and voted on for its initial allocation plan at a cabinet meeting on Tuesday. According to the Finance Ministry, as of the end of November, 90.1% of this year's main budget has been spent, and 94% and 98% of the two supplementary budgets have been executed. Jung-kwan, Arirang News.
The South Korean economy remains on its recovery track for the second month in a row. Now, this is according to the Korea Development Institute on this Monday. A rebound in domestic spending on the back of government support measures has reportedly kept service production steady, but the construction sector remains in the doldrums. Exports, meanwhile, expanded over 8% in November on the back of chips and cars. However, in terms of export volume, the state-run think tank believes the pace of growth is tapering off. Also, lingering uncertainties in the global trade environment amid U.S. tariffs continue to weigh on non-semiconductor sectors. Industry Minister Kim Jung-kwan says the $200 billion investment that South Korea has pledged for the U.S. over the next decade will go into areas that benefit both countries and boost opportunities for South Korean companies. Speaking on a YouTube channel this past Sunday, he pointed to nuclear power, critical minerals and artificial intelligence as sectors of bilateral interest. He also noted that the U.S. hopes to build more nuclear power plants and seeks companies capable of constructing such facilities and related equipment, creating significant opportunities for South Korean businesses. The investment plan follows a trade accord under which South Korea has committed $200 billion in cash and an additional $150 billion for industry-led projects, namely shipbuilding. Battery giant LG Energy Solution has won an additional contract worth $1.4 billion or just over 2 trillion Korean won to supply electric vehicle batteries to Mercedes-Benz Group. The contract will run from March 2028 to June 2035 and will provide batteries for cars sold in Europe and North America. The contract comes after a visit by leading delegates of Mercedes-Benz Group to South Korea last month, during which they sat down with top LG executives. In other news, in line with the ruling party's campaign for judicial reform, over 100 judges nationwide gathered either physically or virtually to partake in a related conference on this Monday. Our political correspondent An Sung-jin reports.
As the ruling bloc continues to push for judicial reform, judges across the country gathered to discuss the matter. 108 judges out of the total of 126 attended the National Judges Representative Conference on Monday, either online or in person. This biannual meeting is composed of judges elected from courts of all levels and serves to garner opinions from frontline judges on the judicial administration and judicial independence. It also hopes to contribute to restoring trust in the judiciary and improving the judicial system.
Several important bills concerning the judicial system are currently under debate in the National Assembly, and their impact on the public will be significant. I believe it is our responsibility to explain the perspectives of the judges.
The two main agenda items were judicial reform and the changes to the appointment and evaluation of judges. The meeting also further discussed other items, including the composition of a judicial administration committee and the creation of a special court dedicated to insurrection. Earlier on the same day, the ruling Democratic Party and the main opposition People Power Party had spoken up regarding judicial reform as well.
The main focus of the December extraordinary session will be on the judicial reform bills and the proposal to establish a special court for insurrection cases. This session will be a moment for legislation aimed at improving people's livelihoods.
The DP ran through the Special Insurrection Court and Judicial Distortion Bill in the Legislation and Judiciary Committee. Presidents of courts nationwide have raised strong concerns about the unconstitutionality.
As debates intensify both inside and outside the National Assembly, the path forward for judicial reform remains uncertain. Continued dialogue among judges, lawmakers, and the public will play a decisive role in shaping the final outcome. An Sung-jin, Arirang News.
The U.S. has highlighted South Korea as a model ally that will witness special favor from the Trump administration for its dedication to defense. Our Park Chun-han has details.
U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said during a speech at the Reagan National Defense Forum on Saturday that Washington will grant special favors to model allies, including South Korea. Hegseth explained that countries that step up to share the cost of collective defense fall into this category, and added that those failing to do so could experience repercussions.
Model allies that step up, like Israel, South Korea, Poland, increasingly Germany, the Baltics, and others, will receive our special favor. Allies that do not, allies that still fail to do their part for collective defense, will face consequences.
He also hailed South Korea as a model nation that meets the new global standard under U.S. President Donald Trump's presidency.
And just last month, South Korea committed to spend 3.5% of GDP on core military spending and assume the leading role in Iraq's conventional defense.
At the same event, Hexes clarified that U.S. policy toward China aims not for domination, but for a balance of power, adding that the U.S. will pursue wider military-to-military communication to ease tensions between the superpowers.
The second line of effort for the War Department is deterrence against China through strength, not through confrontation. As I said at Shangri-La earlier this year, we're not trying to strangle China's growth. We're not trying to dominate or humiliate them. Not dominating China, but rather ensuring they do not have the ability to dominate us or our allies.
Hex's speech followed the White House release of a new national security strategy last Thursday, which outlines the Trump administration's focus on protecting the U.S. homeland, reinforcing its role in the Western Hemisphere, deterring conflict over Taiwan, and urging allies and partners to take on greater security responsibilities. 박준환, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, recent policy documents unveiled by both the US and China appear to have omitted the word denuclearization with regard to North Korea, prompting much speculation here in South Korea. Our defense correspondent Kim Bo-kyung reports.
Both the U.S. and China made no mention of North Korea nor its denuclearization in their recently released security manifestos. According to the South China Morning Post on Saturday, China's military white paper released in late November omitted the term denuclearization of the Korean peninsula. Marking an update of a 2005 version, it said that China adopts an impartial stance and adheres to the right approach of working for peace and stability on the peninsula and the resolution of Korean peninsula issues through political means, instead of mentioning how it supports the denuclearization of it. The new U.S. national security strategy released by the White House on Friday local time failed to mention denuclearization of the peninsula as well. In the document released during the former President Joe Biden administration in 2022, the NSS mentioned Pyongyang 3 times, saying it would pursue diplomacy for the complete denuclearization of the peninsula while strengthening extended deterrence. The one released in 2017 from Trump's first administration also mentioned North Korea 17 times, saying the U.S. would work with allies and partners to achieve CVID of the peninsula. The omissions have raised concerns, with some viewing it as the peninsula issue being deprioritized by Washington. One expert says the importance of dealing with peninsula issue has been waning in the U.S. for some time, adding that there could be many more reasons.
Trump could think that the denuclearization issue could be a potential stumbling block to U.S.-North Korea summit diplomacy. Also, Trump is now looking for a grand bargain with China, not just on trade, tariffs, and economic issues, but also bringing nuclear controls and broader security concerns to the table.
Though acting U.S. Ambassador to South Korea Kevin Kim reaffirmed on Monday that Pyongyang's complete denuclearization remains a shared policy with the South, the expert says Trump could be considering peninsula issues as a pawn on a chessboard for him to bargain with China, though some hawkish traditional foreign policymakers who believe it is important to keep China in check might disagree with him. Now all eyes are on the National Defense Strategy that will be released based on the NSS to see whether it will mention peninsula issues. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
And there has been a fresh escalation in tensions between China and Japan. Tokyo is accusing a Chinese military jet of aiming its radar at Japanese fighter jets over Okinawa this past weekend. Now that accusation has been denied by Beijing. Our Lee Seung-jae has the latest.
Japan is raising strong concerns after a tense aerial encounter with China near Okinawa. Early Sunday, Tokyo confirmed that it launched a formal protest with Beijing after a Chinese J-15 fighter jet launched from the aircraft carrier Liaoning locked on its radar onto Japanese F-15s on Saturday. Officials say the Chinese aircraft intermittently locked on twice, once in the late afternoon for about 3 minutes and again in the evening for roughly 30 minutes. Japan's defense ministry says the radar lock was detected by different Japanese fighters that had scrambled to counter what appeared to be a potential airspace violation. Defense Minister Shinjiro Koizumi called the incident dangerous and extremely regrettable. In both cases, the Chinese jet stayed outside Japanese airspace, and there were no injuries or damage. Meanwhile, China's Foreign Ministry spokesperson Lin Jian defended Chinese naval activity, saying operations comply with international law and warning others not to exaggerate China's actions. A spokesperson for the Chinese Navy said Sunday that the Liaoning Carrier Strike Group has been conducting routine training over international waters near Okinawa. According to Beijing, Japanese Air Self-Defense Force jets repeatedly approached the training zone, harassing Chinese operations and posing risks to flight safety. China said it had announced the exercises beforehand, called Japan's version of events inconsistent with the facts, and urged Tokyo to stop what it called slanderous accusations. The radar lock incident comes at a time of deepening strain in bilateral relations. Tensions surged in early November after Japan's Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi said Japan's military could become involved if China were to take action against Taiwan. Beijing strongly objected, saying Japan was interfering in a core sovereignty issue. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
South Korea's demographic portrait is witnessing a visible shift as residents here with a migration background now account for over 5% of the country's total population. Our Kim Do-yeon covers this reality and more.
South Korea is diversifying at a fast pace, with 1 out of 20 people in the nation having a migrant background. According to the Ministry of Data and Statistics on Monday, the number of these people reached a record 2.715 million in 2024, up 5.2% from 2023. This also represents 5.2% of the total population, a threshold often cited by experts as the beginning of a multicultural society. The ratio grew even faster due to the Korean native population remaining stagnant. Under the ministry, the term migrant background constitutes 4 groups of people: foreign nationals who stay in South Korea for more than 3 months, naturalized citizens, second-generation immigrants, and those previously in statistical blind spots such as North Korean defectors. To capture these figures, the government utilized a new register census method for the first time and aggregated administrative data from 13 agencies, including the Justice Ministry.
The biggest significance is that these are the first statistics to cover the entire population with a migration background residing in Korea. We can now identify policy targets, such as North Korean defectors or children of undocumented residents that were previously in blind spots.
Critically, this population is young. Nearly 82% are in the productive working age range, providing a vital cushion for the country's shrinking workforce. Officials attribute the rapid surge to specific economic needs. A dramatic shift is already visible in the next generation. For young people under 24, Vietnam has overtaken China as the most common country of origin, accounting for 27.2%.
The rise is largely due to the inflow of foreign workers and international students. We are also seeing natural growth as these residents settle down, form families, and have children.
This is evident in the regional breakdown. The data reveals a heavy concentration in the capital region, where 56.8% of the migrant population resides. Specifically, cities like Ansan, Hwaseong, and Siheung in Gyeonggi-do province have the highest numbers. The ministry explained that foreign workers are flocking to these areas because they are home to major industrial complexes, essentially making the map of the migrant population a mirror of the manufacturing sector. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
And a bookstore in Cheongju City is hoping to boost reading among teenagers with the support of their older counterparts. Our Park Ko-nu tells us how.
A notice put up at the entrance of this small independent bookstore says that adolescents can take books for free. It promotes a so-called I'll Buy You a Book project that was launched in February, where adults visiting the bookstore can anonymously prepay for books. Then adolescents visiting the bookstore can take books for free, up to the prepaid amount. The project began from a suggestion made by a frequent customer who wanted to encourage and help teenagers to read more.
I really liked that books became more accessible for them. Seeing the number of books they took gradually increase showed that these teenagers don't actually hate reading, they like it.
There's only one condition for this project. The adolescents need to come to the bookstore on their own without a guardian and choose the books themselves. The idea is to help them discover their own preferences without outside influence. The process itself has been shown to slowly restore the communication between generations that had faded over time.
I felt that there was a kind of disconnect between generations. But through this project, the students receive warmth from the adults' donations, while the adults feel that they are investing in the future.
Some say that being able to choose the books they want without worrying about cost truly feels like receiving a gift.
There are so many books I want to read, but I can't choose all of them because of cost. So receiving this kind of support feels like a gift. It's my first time experiencing something like this, and it's really nice.
Word of this project has spread through social media, and more than 30 books are being donated each month. This project of sharing that started in a small independent bookstore is opening doors to teenagers who want to read. 박건우, Arirang News.
On the entertainment front, K-pop girl group Twice has unveiled its concert schedule for next year at the Japan National Stadium. According to its agency JYP Entertainment, the group is expected to draw some 240,000 fans over a period of 3 days by expanding the concert hall capacity with a full 360-degree sitting setup. The concerts will serve as an extension of Twice's 6th world tour, with 3 shows starting April 25th in the neighboring country.
This is The World Now, bringing you everything you need to know from around the globe. In Russia, the Kremlin publicly welcomed President Donald Trump's new national security strategy, calling it, quote, largely consistent with Moscow's vision. The 33-page document released in Washington this week warns of Europe's potential civilizational erasure and said the U.S. should focus on resistance to Europe's current political trajectory. But it did not cast Russia as a U.S. threat. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov on Sunday described the shift as a positive step. Meanwhile, the U.S. and Ukraine wrapped up 3 days of talks in Florida aimed at drafting a peace deal. But hours after those talks ended, Russian strikes were reported in Kremenchuk and other regions of Ukraine. In the West African country of Benin on Sunday, the government said it had foiled an attempted coup. This came hours after soldiers appeared on national television claiming to suspend the constitution. Beninese President Patrice Talon told citizens the situation was totally under control, praising loyalist forces for removing the mutineers from key sites. Explosions were later heard in the country's largest city of Cotonou after Nigerian fighter jets entered Benin's airspace to help secure the area. Officials said 14 people were arrested. The African Union condemned the coup attempt, and Nigeria called it an assault on democracy. In India on Sunday, authorities opened an inquiry after a fire tore through a nightclub in Goa, killing 25 people. Police said the blaze broke out shortly after midnight at the Birch by Romeo Lane Club in Arpura. Goa's Chief Minister Pramod Sawant said the investigation would determine the cause and responsibility, adding that 6 people who were injured are in stable condition. Prime Minister Narendra Modi offered condolences and announced compensation for the victims' families. Britain's Lando Norris has won his first Formula One world title. The McLaren driver finished 3rd at the season-ending Abu Dhabi Grand Prix in the United Arab Emirates on Sunday. But that was enough to secure the championship by 2 points over race winner Max Verstappen. It marks McLaren's first driver's title since 2008 and makes Norris the 11th British F1 world champion. Chu Ji-hyun, Arirang News.
After a mild day yesterday, temperatures dropped sharply on Monday. In Seoul, the high only reached 6 degrees, which is about 7 degrees lower than yesterday. Tomorrow morning will be even colder, with Seoul plummeting to around -2 degrees Celsius and most regions waking up to sub-zero temperatures. During the day, temperatures will warm back up to the above seasonal average levels, so there's no major cold snap expected. Around the East Coast, dry weather warnings have been in place for more than a week. With strong winds blowing, especially in mountainous areas, please be extra careful with anything that could spark a fire. Tomorrow morning will start cold at -7 degrees in Chuncheon and -4 degrees in Daejeon. Daily highs will rise to 9 degrees in Daejeon, Daegu, and Gyeongju, 11 degrees in Busan. Toward the end of this week, more frequent rain and snow are forecast around the country. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
Those are the headlines at this hour here in South Korea. As always, thank you for watching.
저는 만 5살에 바이올린을 시작했는데요. 바이올린 소리를 워낙 좋아했어서 그 특유의 따뜻함과 약간 사람의 목소리 같은 목소리를 갖고 있거든요, 바이올린이. 저는 무대에 올랐을 때보다는 이제 혼자 연습할 때 더 큰 희열을 느끼는데 제가 표현하고자 하는 음악이 잘 나왔을 때 그때 가장 큰 기쁨을 느끼는 것 같아요. 그래서 저만의 색깔을 어떻게 하면 찾아갈 수 있을까 그걸 제일 많이 고민하는 것 같아요. 아무래도 연습을 할 때는 이제 생각과 고민을 많이 하는 반면에 무대에서 연주할 때는 정말 머릿속을 비우고 아무 생각도 안 하려고 하는 것 같아요. 무대에서는 자유롭게 콩쿨 무대도 저만의 독주라고 생각하는 자세를 가지려고 하고 있어요. 사실 바이올린과는 거의 제 인생의 대부분을 같이 해왔기 때문에 저를 힘들게 할 때도 많지만 제가 가장 사랑하고 아끼는 존재입니다. 작곡가가 전달하고 싶은 메시지와 또 제 자신이 관객들에게 전달하고 싶은 메시지를 모두 다 설득력 있게 잘 전달할 수 있는 그런 연주자가 되고 싶습니다.
Analysts believe South Korea's nuclear submarine ambition may raise the risks of an underwater arms race here in Asia. Other analysts here in the country are quick to point out that the world's two superpowers appear to have omitted the pursuit of denuclearization of North Korea from their security strategies. Hope your work week is off to a good start. It's Monday, December 8th here in Seoul. I'm Min Sun-hee. Now today we touch upon defense-related policies here in South Korea and those of its partners. For this, I have Rui Valdez with Spanish news agency EFE Spain here in the studio. Rui, welcome back.
Nice to be here, Sun-hee.
I also have Professor Che Hyun-jin at Kyunghee University joining our talk virtually. Professor Che, it's great to have you with us.
Good evening. Thanks for having me.
Right, we shall start here in the studio. Rui, let's begin with details of the recent article, I believe, by Reuters that raises concerns of an underwater arms race here in Asia amid South Korea's pursuit of nuclear-powered submarines.
Right, well, what President Lee Jae-myung called one of his administration's biggest achievements in this article is discussed as, well, it might be an achievement, but it also could trigger an type of arms race in the region by the main countries around that are looking at what happened to Seoul in this green light by the US, and they will try, or it's possible that they will try to catch up with these technologies either by building their own nuclear power submarines, like in the case of Japan, or China to strengthen overall their military capacities because of the whole tensions in the regions. And because even though South Korea is framing it as a way to strengthen their defense capabilities and deterrence against North Korea, many pundits, including in this article, are mentioning that it might have other objectives, especially for the U.S., by strengthening Korea, to deter also China. So in this context, what we know also, or what at least in the side of North Korea has said that they're developing their own nuclear-powered submarine. This has not been entirely confirmed, but there's many indications that Russia is helping them to develop this technology. And of course, China, it's becoming more observant of how this turns out, or let's say their attention was clearly there when there was this announcement, because of course, since the U.S. is announcing this strategic flexibility, alliance modernization, that it's pushing South Korea to have a broader expansion on the role of the U.S. forces here and also the forces in terms of other regional problems outside of North Korea. Of course, that's on Beijing interest. And according to the article and other indications, they say Japan actually was very surprised when they gave this green light to Seoul to build these submarines. And now their Ministry of Defense and discussion inside the country has pointed out that, well, now there's an option that Japan also tries to develop these submarines that they don't have. Just to finalize, to take into account that only United States, Russia, China, UK, France, and India actually have this type of submarines, and Australia will soon also have. And if South Korea develops, which is the plan, this submarine, it will be the first non-nuclear weapon state to operate such vessels.
Right, so at present we have 6 countries that possess nuclear-powered submarines, and South Korea is hoping to join those countries. Professor Che, do you believe South Korea's nuclear submarine ambitions may fuel an underwater arms race?
I think that is a very important question. I generally agree with Rui, but I have to emphasize South Korea's official position now. The nuclear-powered submarine is not about nuclear weapon, and they are response to North Korea's underwater missile threat. Okay, and the South Korea will stay within a strict non-proliferation regime. So there is no question about this official position of the South Korean government. However, the reality is more complex. A nuclear submarine does not only operate near the Korean peninsula, its range is far wider, and also it can stay underwater much longer, and it can even track Chinese submarine activity in distant waters. And that's why the President Lee Jae-myung mentioned China's submarine activity when he spoke to President Trump in Gyeongju. So that's why some people say like this: if Seoul is really focusing on deterring just North Korea, other systems such as Hyunmoo-5 ballistic missile and F-35K fighter jet would be more cost-effective. So the choice of a nuclear submarine indicate a much larger role for South Korea as an American ally in East Asia. So there is a famous line in the Spider-Man movie: with greater power comes greater responsibility. I think this reflects our situation very well. If South Korea gains this advanced weapon system, our responsibility in regional security will naturally grow. So will the expectation from the United States. So the important question is, will it really provoke an arms race with China or Japan? So, of course, this is not the goal of South Korea. However, we must admit the risk exists. So I think the key is transparency and calm dialogue with our neighbors so that this weapon system is seen as a defense, not as an expansion.
Right, and speaking about China, exactly or roughly about a month after South Korea's request for nuclear-powered submarines to Washington and Washington's related approval, China released a new policy paper that analysts believe accepts North Korea's possession of nuclear weapons. Could you tell us a bit about this paper, Rui, and the reason behind this belief among analysts?
Yes, this omission of the term denuclearization in this paper of China, it's what was reported first by South China Morning Post, and interviewing many experts that say this could mean a tacit acceptance. It's not official acceptance, but a tacit acceptance of North Korea as a nuclear status amid the strengthening of the relationships between those two countries, as we saw in September in the military parade in Beijing, where Kim Jong-un had a place of honor next to Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin. The fact that when they met, denuclearization was not talked about. So pundits are saying that this seems to be in line of this new relation that we're seeing recently. This white paper of defense, what gets the attention of everybody is that the term denuclearization was included in several years before 2005, 2017, and early of the 2024. And now, instead of calling it instead of calling denuclearization, it's called resolving the Korea Peninsula issue through political means, urging all sides to avoid aggressive deterrence. So this is a major shift, at least in the rhetoric or on the use of these terms by China. At the same time, they say, well, this could be a strategic shift, now saying that China is prioritizing competition with Washington and regional alignment with North Korea and Russia, which is also, as we will talk a little bit later, could be comparable or in some parts similar to what U.S. did in their own defense paper that we will talk about. By this, as I mentioned, analysts are not saying that this is official, but it's like a pragmatic acceptance of this nuclear status, something that North Korea has been looking for since many, many years, insisting recently, some years ago also, that they will not give up on their own nuclearization and that they will not give up their nuclear weapons. And we're seeing China taking this new strategic decision to show that they might be on Pyongyang's side in this matter.
Right, and staying with diction, Professor Che, the Lee Jae-myung administration appears to have chosen the phrase "a peninsula without nuclear weapons" over the word denuclearization with regard to its North Korea policy. What do you suppose the broader implications of this particular phrase, Professor Che?
Okay, the phrase denuclearization has only one direction. So it means only North Korea must abandon its nuclear weapon. So naturally, the Pyongyang does not like this kind of expression, and as it hears like pressure, not a dialogue. But the new phrase, Korean Peninsula without nuclear weapon, is more balanced. It means both South and North Korea will not have a nuclear weapon. Okay. It also shows that South Korea will not build its own weapon or host American weapon in the future. And this is important, especially nowadays, because many major actors are closely watching the South Korea's nuclear debate nowadays. So some surveys show that almost half of the South Korean people believe that this country needs its own nuclear weapon for deterrence. So it is true that other countries, some people, worry that South Korea may one day build its own weapon. So also the nuclear power, the submarine system is adding more attention nowadays. And therefore, a stronger Navy could lead some people to believe that South Korea is stepping towards some nuclear capability in the future. And therefore, this new phrase, Korean Peninsula without nuclear weapon, is important because it has two goals. The first, it means South Korean government will maintain our long-term vision of a nuclear-free North Korea. And secondly, it also reassures the world that even with a nuclear-powered submarine, South Korea will not pursue its own nuclear weapon in the future.
Right, and staying with policy documents, as you mentioned earlier, the Trump administration's latest security strategy, which was released late last week, I believe this makes no mention of North Korea. Could you walk us through the main points of Washington's latest strategy document?
Yes, again, in the same line, it caught the attention of everyone that the national security strategy, for the first time since North Korea started their nuclear program, as far as we know, it does not mention North Korea at all. These deprioritizations caught the attention, again, of everyone. There could be multiple interpretations of why this is happening. Some people could say that maybe Washington is getting ready to accept North Korea as a nuclear state. Some others just saying that maybe it's a little bit of a bait for North Korea to say, okay, they're open to the idea of accepting us as a nuclear state, so maybe we could engage in dialogue. But yeah, the fact that, for example, in 2017, there was 17 references to North Korea in the national security strategy, that with Biden in 2022, there was 3 references. Well, this is actually important. And also, there's another factor. There were some clarifications that I will talk about, but there's another factor that happened with the Obama administration, that many critics says that the fact that they did not prioritize North Korea, that they ignored North Korea, in fact, gave them a little bit of space for them to keep developing and improving their military assets. In this way, we're wondering how prioritized will be Pyongyang, because if it's fully ignored, then we are sure that we will see these types of criticisms arise again. Being all that said, yesterday, National Security Advisor Wee Sun-lak, and today the acting ambassador of U.S. in South Korea, they clarified that denuclearization and North Korea are still priorities in the U.S. agenda. They remind, or especially the ambassador today, remind that after the summit, or some days after the summit between Donald Trump and Lee Jae-myung, the latest one, in the joint fact sheet, they included that they were still going to pursue denuclearization of the peninsula. It's very interesting what Professor Choi mentions, in the sense that not talking about denuclearization at all, it will apply for both Koreas. Many people are not talking yet about that, but I actually think that's a very good point. That could be also another point of discussion, like what's going to happen with that? Like, you are actually not talking about it at all. Does this mean that South Korea maybe in the future can adopt a nuclear weapon? We don't know. And so, yeah, well, we saw, again, in terms of relating it a little bit what we were talking at the beginning, that the U.S. strategy or priorities are more focused on China, regional security, the issue of Taiwan. And yeah, this might mean what many pundits have been pointing out, or many signals that have been that arose before, that maybe the U.S. is looking for this new strategic flexibility of the U.S. Forces here in South Korea to attend regional problems or tensions related to China more than North Korea. Is this an open door for Kim Jong-un to say, okay, maybe it's my time to engage in dialogue because they're not going to be pushing me or sanctioning me as before? Well, we will need to wait and see. But clearly, what we see in the national security strategy of the U.S. is that the concern, at least, is more regional than North Korea.
Right. So for now, then, Professor Shea, the Trump administration's security document does not mention North Korea. But as Rui said, it mentions Taiwan and the importance of conflict prevention with China. This being said, Professor Shea, what are the risks of South Korea being drawn into a hostile confrontation between these two superpowers over Taiwan in the foreseeable future?
It's a very critical and important question for us. So opinion polls in South Korea shows that the most South Korean people do not want to be pulled into a Taiwan war, and they prefer a limited logistical support from the rear area rather than sending our force to the front line. But the reality on the ground is changing. For example, the General Bronson, the commander of the U.S. Force Korea, has called the Pyeongtaek military base as the closest American base to Beijing. So that means in a Taiwan crisis, the U.S. force stationed in South Korea could be used for deterrence or even for operations against China. So in this worst case scenario, the South Korea could become a core battlefield area, even if we don't want it. So that is the real potential danger, being drawn into a great power armed clash because of our geographical location and alliance ties with the United States. And for this reason, I think diplomacy is very important. The first goal of our diplomacy should be to stop any war from starting. And for example, nowadays there is an ongoing some dispute between China and Japan, and therefore it is important for South Korea and other countries we can work quietly to reduce this ongoing tension between the two countries, to keep their disputes from getting out of control. So once a war breaks out in East Asia, it would be very difficult or impossible for South Korea to stay neutral. And therefore, I think we need a strong deterrence and active diplomacy to prevent potential conflict between US and China before it ever reaches the Korean Peninsula.
Right, and essentially that appeared to be the stance of President Lee Jae-myung while he was speaking to the foreign media last week, I believe, Rui. Now, with regard to the conflict that Professor Che mentioned between Japan and China, President Lee Jae-myung spoke about the importance of seeking solidarity instead of taking sides. You were at that conference, I believe. What are your thoughts with regard to the President's approach to diplomacy?
Well, in general, our interpretation of President Lee Jae-myung's words is, of course, that he's very in line to what Professor Cho just explained. He is putting South Korea more or prioritizing a role of coordinator, of mediator, which is actually maybe it was not expected that tensions will arise so fast just after a new prime minister took power in Japan. But South Korea, or the administration of Lee Jae-myung, was prioritizing this role of South Korea of being more like an international mediator or with different events that we saw this year. So yeah, it was like a very deliberate neutrality in the words of President Lee Jae-myung when he says that taking sides will intensify conflict. So it would be better to seek coexistence and, whenever possible, even act as mediators between these two countries. The news keep coming up yesterday, there was these complaints that Chinese jets lock radar in other Japanese aircrafts. China is saying they're exaggerating. But the thing is still going on and on. I think, as I mentioned, well, not only for the administration of President Jae-myung, but also for anyone, it was hard to see that the Prime Minister Takaichi of Japan was going to make these statements so fast, and then all of a sudden, both countries are in the middle of these tensions that one could say is going to be very hard for at least the Japan side to say sorry or take back the words, because they just started the government. So they could be thinking this could be a signal of weakness if we start on that. On the side of South Korea, as Professor Che already explained, of course, for South Korea, it's better that this tension is not there. They don't want to put at risk any matter of security or regional security. And if it was for the President Jae-myung or anybody, most people in this country, the best thing would be that this tension stop and this is settled. Even a little bit before this statement by Prime Minister Takaichi happened, or she said these words, the tensions, I would say, in the region, the dialogue was not what was, you can even say, a little bit friendly. But now, again, we're in this, in the middle of this, and of course, South Korea is always concerned about what happens between these two countries.
Right. That is here in East Asia, of course. Meanwhile, Professor Che, last week there were a series of high-profile diplomatic encounters with Russia's Vladimir Putin traveling to India to meet with his counterpart Narendra Modi, and French President Emmanuel Macron sitting down in China with his counterpart Xi Jinping. Observers believe, Professor, that we are truly witnessing a world where leaders are choosing to embrace an interest-based, pragmatic approach to diplomacy. What are the pros and cons of this reality, do you think?
Yes, we are seeing a new kind of diplomacy. So all the leaders moving based on their interests, not ideology. So, but this is not negative, I think. A multipolar and interest-based, flexible diplomacy can provide more room for negotiation and more space to choose their alliance partner. But however, the timing is unusual. So we are in the middle of a so-called new Cold War with a deepening US-China rivalry and competition. But however, in this tense moment, the major powers are not lining up behind one bloc. This is a very interesting development. And they are hedging, balancing, and talking to all sides. And I think there is one important reason. There is less credibility in the US-led alliance system. So allies of the United States sometimes do not fully trust American plans in the future. They are not entirely leaving the United States. However, they want to reduce the risk in case US policy changes suddenly. So there is some downside here. If this kind of trend grows, the US-led alliance system will lose its power and credibility. So there will be some less unity, some reduced deterrence power. So if everyone acts based on their own interests, without shared rules or commitments, conflict may be harder to stop. So for this reason, I think flexible diplomacy is okay. But however, this kind of diplomacy can contribute to peace and stability, and only if major powers such as the United States will restore trust and credibility within its own alliance system.
Right. Hopefully that will be the case when the US hosts a multilateral meeting late next year with its global counterparts then. All right, Professor Che, as always, thank you so much for your insights today.
Thank you very much.
And Rui, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts.
Thank you, Simon.
Right, on that note, we say goodbye. As always, thank you for watching. See you same time tomorrow.
To set the facts straight. Get Korea right. 안녕하세요. 저는 방크에서 활동하는 홍단비 청년연구원입니다. 대한민국이라는 국가가 존재한다는 사실을 전 세계에 알리는 공식적인 징표이자 국민을 하나로 통합하게 하는 힘을 가진 이것. 바로 태극기인데요. 일제강점기 당시 태극기는 우리 민족을 하나로 통합시키는 구심점 같은 역할을 하기도 했죠. 대한민국 국기인 태극기에 대해 잘못 알고 있거나 오해하는 부분들이 가끔 발견되더라고요. 제가 태극기에 담긴 의미와 역사에 대해 제대로 알려드릴게요. 최초의 태극기는 1882년에 처음 만들어졌다고 해요. 이후 다양한 형태의 태극기가 제작됐다가 지금은 국가에서 국기를 체계적으로 관리하는 법을 만들어 시행하고 있어요. 태극기에 담긴 의미를 알아볼까요? 먼저 흰색 바탕은 밝음과 순수, 그리고 평화를 사랑하는 우리의 민족성을 나타내요. 태극기 가운데에는 태극 문양이 들어가는데요. 이 태극 문양은 우주 만물이 음양의 조화로 인해 생물을 얻고 발전한다는 대자연의 진리를 표현한 것이라고 해요. 다음으로 건공감리를 그려볼게요. 4개 모서리에 그린 4괴에는 각기 다른 의미가 있어요. 건괴는 하늘, 곤괴는 땅, 감괴는 물, 이괴는 불을 상징해요. 우리 선조들이 생활 속에서 즐겨 쓰던 태극 문양을 중심으로 만들어진 태극기는 우주와 더불어 끝없이 창조와 번영을 바라는 우리 민족의 이상을 담고 있답니다. 대한민국의 정체성과 자긍심을 드러내고 우리 민족을 하나로 뭉치게 하는 태극기, 우리의 자랑스러운 국가 상징입니다. 한국 바로 알리기. 여러분도 함께 해주세요.